Welcome back as we continue to explore Adobe Lightroom Classic. In this tutorial, we're going to look at black and white conversion, and more specifically, black and white conversion as it relates to portrait photography. These techniques work on black and white conversion for any type of photography, but I will mention a couple portrait-specific tips and tricks. First thing is you want to have an image open so you can follow along with me. You'll want to be in the Develop module inside of Lightroom like I am right now. Let's see, first thing let's cover. Portrait photography, you may want to do a little bit of photo touch-up, all right? That is removing some blemishes from your subjects. Now, this is much easier, much more powerful to do full-on photo retouching in Photoshop. But there are a couple tools inside of Lightroom where we could do some basic photo retouching. So I'm going to zoom in really quick. I'm going to click on my image. Now, our subjects here, right, have some pretty good skin. It's not like there's anything I really need to touch up here. All right, but I'm going to show you the technique. We can just take our subject's freckle here, for example. That is not an unwanted blemish, but it will be good to kind of show you how this works. I'm going to take this tool right here, the spot removal tool. Q is the shortcut on the keyboard. You can see their size, feather, opacity. Another way you can adjust the size is right bracket to get bigger, left bracket to get smaller. And I'm just going to pretend that this is an unwanted blemish. It is not, but it just gives us something to show you the technique. I'm going to click on it, and then Lightroom is going to guess and find something with a very similar tonal range and replace it. I can click on this new area and move it anywhere. I could technically say put that there, right? Which I don't want to do, so I'm going to undo. And then I'm going to hit return just to keep it. I'm going to click off of that tool. Now you can see that that so-called blemish is gone. You may want to do that for some of your portraits, photo retouching. Next up, I'm going to zoom in again, and I want to set the white balance of this photo. You may have set the white balance in your camera since you should have shot in RAW, and I recommend shooting in RAW. Then we have a lot of leeway on changing our white balance inside of Lightroom. So I'm going to open up my basics palette here. I'm going to come down to where the white balance picker is, this little eyedropper. I'm going to click on it. And you can either click on the teeth or the whites of the eye. We're looking for a neutral color. You can see how that's kind of gray, right? It's a neutral color. The R, G, and B at the bottom of that little grid are all very close to each other. I'm going to click on that, and you notice it warmed it up a little bit. Back arrow, backslash, before, after, before, after. Warmed up our image a little bit. I like that. Now for the actual black and white conversion, I'm going to come down to my thumbnail strip here at the bottom. I'm going to right click on my thumbnail of this image, and I'm going to create a virtual copy. So I right clicked on the image, create virtual copy. What this does is this creates a reference to the original photo. It does not add any more space on your hard drive. It does not technically create a copy of the picture. It's just a virtual reference that we can then modify without affecting the original. So I have a virtual copy, and I'm going to convert this to black and white. There are a couple ways to do this. One way I'm not even going to show you because it's awful. So I'm going to stick to converting it up here. We can straight click on black and white treatment. But what I like to do instead is on the newer versions of Adobe Lightroom, we can change our profile from Adobe Color to this new setting, which is Adobe Monochrome. And I like to start there. Now this is just a starting point, right? This is not a great black and white conversion at this point. It's just a basic conversion. I'm going to create a second virtual copy of the black and white. So I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to create a virtual copy. This way we can see the basic black and white conversion and black and white conversion after we correct it, right? After we do some development to it. So once this is converted to black and white, and you can see it's highlighted black and white here, we have Adobe Monochrome. Here on the right, we have a profile browser. And if I scroll down, this is optional, but I often like to start here with a little help from Lightroom to get me started with a black and white profile. If I look at my image on the left and I roll over these different profiles, and I'm actually going to zoom in on our main subject's face, and I'm going to roll over these profiles, and they're going to give me different looks. It's not active until I pick it, right? I don't want something that's too harsh, like this one right here, right? We're getting shadows on her face, too much contrast between white and black. Lost too much detail on that one. I want something a little more neutral, not high contrasty like that, a little more neutral. So I like maybe 1, maybe 5. Let's see. I'm going to try black and white 5. I'm going to close that. I'm going to zoom out. And I'm going to see before and after with my backslash key. Very subtle, but you can see the difference there. Now, I'm going to skip these settings in the basics panel, and I'm going to come down to black and white mix. This is typically in a color photo, your HSL and color slider. But since we've converted to black and white, it is now the black and white mix. And essentially how this works. Anything that was red in your original photo, if I were to drag this slider to the left, it would make the red things more red, more black. If I were to drag it to the right, it would make the things that are red in the image more white, so on and so forth. Skin tones are usually in the orange and yellow. Reds are typically the lips. If you're doing landscape black and white conversion, aqua and blue are the sky. All right, so you can adjust these individually, or you can come up here and get this little black and white mix selector, and you can come over to a particular part of the image, like the skin tone here, and I can click up to heighten, to lighten, down to darken a little bit, but I don't want to do that, right? It looks bad, but I'm just showing you that I can control a particular area. I'm actually going to brighten it just a little bit. I want the skin tone to be a little bit brighter. I'm going to do a tonal correction later in the basic panel. Here in his kind of jumpsuit, I might go down just a little bit just to darken. This is kind of a season to taste on your individual photo and the colors that are in it. While I'm here, one thing I'm noticing is, see this gap here, right? I didn't think about this before, but it's not exactly straight. So while I'm down, let's come down to transform, and I'm going to click auto, and it's just going to straighten that out a little bit. I'm going to close it. Now let's come up to our basics panel. We adjusted with the black and white mix. Now in here, we want to expand our tonal range. Right now we don't have anything pure white. If I look at this histogram, there's not much to the right over here, the pure whites. We have some pure blacks, and you can kind of see that here. So I'm going to start with the whites. I'm going to hold Option, and I'm going to drag this to the right until I start to see some areas clipping, right? Right when I start to see that white show up, I'm going to drag it back until it just disappears. So I have plus 33 on the whites. Now you can see in my histogram here, there's a pure white spot. I'm going to do the same thing on the blacks. I'm going to go in the opposite direction. I'm going to hold Option, and I'm going to drag blacks to the left, and I like to have it just so there's a little bit of black showing like that. Okay? Next up, we have our highlights and shadows. I'm going to have Lightroom kind of guess on this for me. So I'm going to shift and double click on the eyedropper for the shadows highlight slider, and shift click on the highlights and shadows. So now Before, after. All right. I'm getting a little bit of change there. Let's click in on our subject again. Now we have clarity. Here's the trick with clarity. On landscape photography, I could bump this 30, 60, something to the right. If you get too much, it starts to bring in this too much texture, right? If I go to the right. This could also be a poor man's photo retouching tool. If I go slightly to the left, it will soften the details of the skin. I don't want to go too much because I don't want to lose too much detail. And if you had more of a gritty looking character, a rough, gruff subject, you might want to increase this clarity a little bit. I typically wouldn't go above 30. So you can do plus 25 for a certain look, or we can come over here and do minus 10 for a softer look, which I'm going to go for this particular image. And I'm going to zoom out. Now, tone curve, all right, we want to add a little bit more contrast between the whites and the blacks, all right? So I'm on my point curve here, which means this bottom right is active. I'm going to option click and add my S-curve points like this. I want to do a very subtle tone curve, S-curve. So I'm going to slightly raise my highlights, slightly bring down the shadows, and then a little bit more in this area. We can turn it on and off, and we're seeing some dark details in there, just a little bit more contrast. And you can adjust this as you see fit. I'm going to move that down just a little bit, and then adjust those. Don't get too crazy, but adjust as you see fit. Next thing you might want to do is come back up here, adjust a few things after that. Exposure, black and white. I might bring my exposure down just a little bit to darken. All right. So something like that. I'm at minus 0.4 on this particular picture. And I'm going to come down to detail. I'm going to do some sharpening. I'm going to get in and maybe look at the eye right here. And I'm going to zoom in on my subject in the main area. And I'm going to hold the option key on radius. All right. And I'm looking for the edges as I do that. All right. And I'm going to drag the radius to the right. And if I start to see too much white lines, kind of a halo effect, I've gone too far. And I'm going to pull that back until that white halo just kind of disappears. On my image here, it's about 1.4. I'm going to take my masking. I'm going to hold the option key. I'm going to drag this a lot to the right. I only want sharpening on the edges, mostly around the edge of the face, the lips, the eyes. And you can see where it's white. That's where it's going to apply the sharpening. So I'm going to move mine to about 80. And I'm going to up the sharpening to, I don't know, maybe 60 or so. That's just going to sharpen the edges around the eyes, the lips, the cheekbone there and stuff like that. I can close my details. Here in the details, let's see. Nope, not in the details. We're going to come down to effects. In this area, I'm going to click on my picture to zoom back out. I like to add a little bit of post-crop vignetting. I like to darken these edges like this. I will typically go maybe a little bit further on black and white than I would in color. And again, season to taste. I just wanted to darken these edges, make it so we're looking at our subject a little bit more. This image was shot at 1600 ISO. So if I zoom in, you'll notice there is already grain. A lot of photographers like to add grain to black and white to give it that more rustic analog feel. If you were to do that and you shot clean at like ISO 100, you can move the grain here a little bit just to add a little bit to give it that old school look. I am not going to do it because we already have grain on this particular photo. All right. The last thing I want to do is, and I probably should have done this earlier, I forgot, but I'm going to crop it. We want to crop our portrait to 8x10. Probably should have done this near the start, but it won't affect anything doing it now. So I'm going to click on my crop tool. I have my aspect ratio here set to original. I'm going to click on original, and I want you to do your portraits at 8x10. Now we can adjust where it's going to crop. I'm actually going to crop off some of this right edge here, but I want it proportional, 8x10. So I'm going to hold shift, and I'm going to drag this corner up like that, and I want to get rid of that kind of extra dead space to the right. I'm going to drag down, or actually up a little bit, but I want to not cut off his head, and then I want like an eye here kind of thing, okay? Maybe I'm losing a little bit of her hand, but I could maybe come down just to get a little bit more like that. And then I'm going to hit return. Right now I'm kind of cropped in a little bit more. I'm still 8x10. I'm focused on my subject. Before, initial black and white with none of the corrections, just what Adobe does by default. Very kind of flat, not much contrast. Afterwards, much more beautiful. Another tip, here we have our single view or a loop view. Right next to it is Shift R, which is the reference view. And I have the photo I'm doctoring up. I have the black and white virtual copy. I can drag it there, and I can compare and contrast left to right. Obviously, this one was before the crop, right? So it's zoomed in a little bit more here. Another tip, if you have a bunch of photos or a bunch of portraits in the same series, and you want to reuse these settings for the other photos that are in the same general location with the same general lighting as a starting point, I'm going to right click. Actually, no, let's not even do that. Let's come over here. I'm going to open up my panel, have my user presets, all right? Presets over here. I'm going to hit the plus sign, add a new preset, and I'm going to create a preset. I want to make sure lens correction is in there. Don't do transform on each individual picture. Then everything else I want. Everything else looks like what I want to copy over. And my preset name, I'm going to name it Natural Light Black and White. The reason why I call it Natural Light Black and White, if you're not one of my students, you happen to be watching this video, is the assignment we were doing was Natural Light Portraiture. So I'm doing Natural Light Black and White. The idea is you don't want to copy and paste this preset to everything. You want it with similar conditions. So I'm going to hit create. What I can now do is I have another photo from the same series, from the same photo shoot. I'm going to right click on it, create a virtual copy. On that virtual copy, I'm going to come over to our user presets, Natural Light Black and White. I'm going to click on it, and it's going to give me that same starting point. Now if I come down to transform, I'm going to auto transform. It twisted it a lot, so I'm going to constrain the crop. I'm going to come up to my crop menu. Oop, won't let me do it in reference view, so I'm going to click out. I'm going to change my aspect ratio to 8x10, and I'm going to bring that up just a little bit. I want to cut off her hand, and I want their eyes kind of up there. Hit return. And then now I have that one and this one as a starting point. And each individual picture is different. I can come back in and adjust some settings here. This one's a little brighter. I might bring the exposure down just a little bit, but I have that kind of good starting point from the previous one. So that's my tips and tricks for you for doing some hopefully awesome black and white conversion with your portrait photography.